Okay, this is the third session where we're going to look at the life-changing tuition, the LCT English book, and we're just going to have a chat about all the bits in it. And we're starting off with, yes, we are starting off with prepositions and conjunctions. So, a preposition is something, as it says here in the book, it shows the relationship. It shows a relationship between things, between a subject and an object, or between two objects. It helps expand information, and it can be to do with the placement, the location of things. You have an example there. The cat is on the table. The dog is under it. So that's subject-object relationship. The cat being the subject, the table being the object of the sentence. The subject, the one in charge of the sentence, as it were, the one controlling the sentence, the one doing an action. The cat is being on top of an object. The object's not doing anything; it's just there, the table. The cat is on it. On is the preposition relating to placement and location. But you can get other sorts of prepositions. Another very common one is to do with time. Let me write this down for you. So you can get prepositions based on placement, but also time. Those are two quite key examples of prepositions. In a sense, you can get prepositions saying, I went to the doctor's before you did, or something like that. Or my doctor's appointment is scheduled on. Scheduled is the preposition because it indicates a relationship between you and your appointment. My appointment is scheduled on. It shows a relationship between the appointment and the date that it's scheduled, or it's scheduled for the date, or you're not allowed to talk during the film. The relationship between talking and the film, not talking rather, and the film is the during bit. That's the preposition. So it shows relationship between the two key parts of a clause. Conjunctions are words that connect clauses and phrases together, as it says there. The most popular kind are your coordinating conjunctions, and they are the ones in the box there, your fanboys acronym. For, and, nor, but, or, yet. So they connect things together. For instance, you couldn't have the sentence of, if we got rid of the word while and replaced it with and in the example given in the book just above there in prepositions. The cat is on the table, the dog is under it. It's not a complete sentence. You can put a full stop in between the two of them. But if you say the cat is on the table, the dog is under it, grammatically it doesn't make sense. You need a conjunction in the middle. The cat is on the table and the dog is under it. The cat is on the table but the dog is under it. These, this box here of conjunctions, these are coordinating conjunctions. You get another kind of conjunction which can be referred to, as I wrote it here, correlative. These are when they sort of double up a bit. They connect things by saying, oh, you can have either this or this. Either or is quite a popular one. You can either go to the doctor's now or you can go later. You see how it still connects the sentence up? You can have both chocolate for dessert and a healthy dinner now, right? You can have both of those things, both and. I'll write those two examples down. But they are when you get sort of two conjunctions in one go. So the examples I gave were either, or both, and that. I'll move that because it goes over your thing. Put them there. Those are your correlative. Correlative conjunctions, because you can put both of those into one long sentence, and they are part of the same conjunction, basically. Because you can't really say you can have either this, you need something else there, don't you? You can have either, your hair can be either brown, blonde. You need another word in there, and that other word is or. So either or, both together, make one conjunction, one correlative conjunction. So these questions here, they're just asking you to identify where the conjunction is in the sentence, and it's asking you to identify also what kind of word a certain word is in a sentence. For example, you get that in number 9 as well. She wanted to go to the zoo or the museum. What is the word or in that? She wanted to go to the zoo or the museum. You see how it connects that the two parts of that sentence together, the two nouns in that sentence, zoo and museum, they're connected by the word or. An interjection is something else. An interjection, we'll talk about this shortly, but I'll just underline this here. This is something we will come to, interjection, very shortly. But pause the video here, have a look through those questions, and then when you've done that, some more on this page here. Pause it again, have a go at these questions, asking you the purposes of prepositions and conjunctions here, like why are they in the sentence, what are they doing, why do they need to be there, what's the point of having them there. So pause the video there, have a go at those questions, and then we will move on to articles and interjections. I told you we get to it. I'm not a liar. I told you we get to interjections. Let's talk about interjections first, actually, because they're easier to understand than articles. So interjections are words that express strong emotion or feeling. Yes, it's quite often a spontaneous thing. For instance, if you stub your toe and you go ow or ah, or you might curse, you might go, I don't know, darn or something, heck, whatever you might say. That is an interjection, because it's not really a sentence, it's not really a clause, it doesn't follow the same rules as sentences or other kinds of word, right? But it can function on its own. This is an important thing to understand with an interjection. It can sometimes be one word, but interjections can function as their own sentence. They don't need to follow the rest of the rules, because it's just like an ow, something spontaneous, a reaction, exclamation mark, as it says in the example. You get it with exclamations, as I just said, these shouts, or curses, or greetings, hi, hello, that's one sentence, done. You don't have a full stop or an exclamation mark after it. Hesitations, these aren't words that follow the rest of the rules, but they do exist. Responses, as someone's talking to you, maybe as I'm talking to you, you might just sit there and nod along and go, okay, yeah. So you see how these words, they don't really follow the rest of the rules, but they are fine existing on their own away from rules. Let me give you the examples I just said. So for interjections, you can get exclamations, your shouts, help, for instance, curses, you darn when you stub your toe, greetings, hi, hello, hesitations, what, or your responses, okay, understood, yes, gotcha, roger, if you're using a walkie-talkie, put them there. Okay, so articles. These are small words that join with nouns to end up forming what we might call noun phrases, because it's more than one word. A phrase, we'll get to phrases, we'll talk about them more shortly, but the simplest way to explain the word phrase is more than one word, basically. More than one word that does make sense in a grammatically ordered sense. But articles, they come together to form noun phrases, because it is no longer apple, it is the apple, or an apple. It is no longer the tree. Pardon me, it's no longer tree, it's the tree, or a tree. Let's have a look at this. So, we've got our two kinds here. So we've got an indefinite article and a definite article. The key word, and it uses it in both definitions in the book here, the key word here is, I'll do it here, specific. Indefinite articles are not, you see that there, not specific. Definite articles are specific, is specific. So, when we are talking, something a bit random, we're not really focusing on a specific example. Let's say that later I might have a bath. I don't know when the bath's going to happen, but I'm going to have a bath, right? It's not a specific bath, it's not. I'm not imagining how the direct examples are going to happen. I don't know exactly what's going to happen when I have a bath, but I'm going to have a bath, right? It's not specific, it's just something that's going to happen somewhere. There isn't a reference point. A definite article is one where we know exactly what we're talking about. We know the circumstances, we know what it looks like, we know what it's going to feel like, we can point to it maybe even. It requires more context, you're more likely to get it when you're telling a story, right? So say if you were going to, I'm talking to my parents and I say, I might go out for a walk today, I might go out for a walk. But if you're telling a story about the walk, you might go, so I was out on, and during the walk, because you already told people that you went on a walk, and it's the same walk, so you go, that walk I mentioned earlier, it's the walk, it's the same walk, it's a specific thing that already has context, that already has a reference point. When the example here is talking about I will eat an apple, it's just any apple in the future. When I say I will eat the apple, someone might be holding an apple and go, would you like this apple? And you go, yeah, I'll eat that apple. I'll eat the apple. Yeah. If I'll have it, I'll eat the apple. Yeah. Because we know what apple we're talking about. We can see it. It's a specific apple. The other thing, one more thing that's important to understand with articles is, and we all know this, it might go without saying, but do not forget your a or an. An, when the noun that comes after your article begins with a vowel. For instance, not a apple. In English, that's incorrect grammar. As far as I'm aware, English is the only language that has this sort of a-an distinction. It's other languages that you actually get these, and this is, I'm not going to explain this, but in other languages with articles, they're actually defined by gender, which is a whole other complicated thing. We don't need to talk about that today. But just remember when to use a and an. Very good. Okay. So, have a look at these questions for me. Pick the correct article, basically. The correct one grammatically, your a, your and, the, is, sometimes. And then you need to choose the correct interjections at points as well. Pause the video here, have a look through them, and then when you've done that, come down to finish this section of questions. Pause the video here, have a look through them, and then we can continue on. So, sentences and subjects. Yes, very good. So, sentences. We all know what a sentence is. It's this chain of words that come together to make a grammatical unit of words that make sense. These are, words are the building blocks of sentences. Sentences are the building blocks for actually speaking, right? For telling something coherent, a story. And sentences are like recipes in that the most basic kinds of sentence have the most obvious and simple ingredients, right? Because there are different kinds of sentences, but the most basic ones are the easiest to remember how to make, right? So, the simplest kind of sentence has a subject. Do we have this? Yeah, we know what subject is. Good. So, a subject, which is the thing that performs the verb, the doing word. I am the subject, I do the thing. If I'm talking about a squirrel running up the tree, the squirrel is doing the running. The running is the verb. Because the squirrel's doing it, they are the subject. Okay? So, and then it quite often involve an object, the simplest kind of sentence as well. Where is the squirrel running to? Or what is the squirrel running on? To and on. Prepositions, very good, you should know this by now, because they refer to where the action is happening. It talks about a relationship between the squirrels running, you know. The squirrel is running on the tree. The tree, because it's having the running being done to it, it's not doing the running is happening on it, in relation to it, that is the object. What you've constructed there is your most simple sentence. Okay, and we will get to types of sentences next, but that is the very basic sentence. Subject does a verb related to an object. Okay, so we have here the subject-verb agreement. Every sentence must have a verb, the subject and the verb must match. Now, we've spoken about this previously. I'm not going to scroll all the way up, but it should be a word that if you've watched the other two videos I've done, you should recognise by now. Conjugations. What this is talking about is that the subject you use has to match up to the way the verb sounds. Remember when we spoke about the verb to be? We said it was conjugated as follows. I am, you are, he, she, it, one is. We are, you, plural, are, and they are. That's how the verb to be changes. Okay, so if we had a singular subject, as the example is saying, let's just come up with a different one. Let's go back to the squirrel. The squirrel. If the squirrel is doing the running, we know that it's, to be. So we could say, oh, the squirrel is, because that's he, she, it. The squirrel is an it, right? Or a he, I suppose. A he. Or a she. Who knows? But we know that with those kinds of pronouns, to be becomes it. So the squirrel is running along the tree, or up the tree, or on the tree. If it was squirrels, we know we would have to change it to the squirrels are running on the tree. Yeah. So that there, the mice are eating the cheese versus the previous example of the mouse is eating the cheese. We can see how that changes. The way that verb changes in respect to what the subject is or how many the subject is, whether it's plural or not as well, we call that conjugating a verb. That's how it matches up to the subject. So it's important to know when you're using and how to use the correct conjugations. So, purposes of sentences. We've got 4 kinds of sentences, or rather 4 things that a sentence can do. You can have a statement, so it gives you information, otherwise known as, so a statement, otherwise known as, when we're talking formally, it's a declarative. You declare something. We've heard that word before, yeah? To declare something. A statement gives a fact. It's a declarative sentence, right? So, you can also get a question. You can get a question, which is, looking for an answer. It's asking for information. What we call that, if we're speaking formally, so statement, declarative, you're declaring information. Question, you're looking for information. You might have heard the word interrogate. It's what you do to suspects in a crime to get information out of them. You ask for information, you interrogate them. The sentences that you might use are interrogatives. These can often be identified 2 ways. Question mark at the end, and also when you ask a question, very often you go up at the end. Are you leaving now? Would you like me to meet you? That's how we know it's a question. That sound of a word sort of rising, a sentence rising at the end, we call that an inflection. The way we say the word, and it's inflected with a higher pitch. There's an inflection. We can hear the change in the way it's said, and when we hear that, we go, that's probably a question. That's probably an interrogative sentence. So Your third purpose of a sentence here is a command. That is when we are giving an order. We require something from someone. This, your third kind of command, requiring something from someone, scroll down a bit, is called an imperative. It is imperative you must do this. Imperative is a synonym, also means, similar meaning, to, it's imperative you do this, to needing to. You need to do this, you must do this, it is imperative you do this. When we are requiring something of someone, when we are demanding something, commanding something, we are saying an imperative sentence. Okay, so last but not least, I lied. Imperative sentence. One important thing about your commands in your imperative sentence is that most commonly they come in the present tense, so they're happening now, and in the second person. You've probably heard this before: the first person, the second person, and the third person. First person is first person, I do something. Second person, you do something. Third person, they, he, she, it does something. You must do this. You must do that. You need to do that. It is imperative you. You. They are commonly, because you're telling someone to do something, in the present tense and in the second person. There you go. I think you can read that. Cool. Right, now we're last but not least. So, exclamation. That's exactly what I would call it as well. There's no more formal way to describe a sentence where you are expressing an emotion. This is when you sort of shout. You show that perhaps you're upset with something. Why did you do that? Although that's also an interrogative, because it might have a question mark at the end. Or, I can't believe you've done that is a better one. I can't believe you've done that! Exclamation mark at the end. You're angry. You're demonstrating an emotion. I'm devastated. You're upset. These are exclamatory sentences. They're exclamations. So, we've had a chat about that. Have a go at these questions now. It's just about noticing what the subject in each sentence is. Remember, the subject is the person doing the action, doing the verb. The object is having the action done to it or in relation to it. The object doesn't do the action, the subject does. So have a look at those, pause it here, have a look at them, and then come down, do a few more. You've got a question about saying, what type of sentence is this, what type of sentence is that. Pause the video here, have a look through these. Scroll back up, or go back in the video and have a listen to me talking about what each different purpose of a sentence could be, and the formal names for them and all of this. Have a go at these ones, and then once you've done that, let's look at this last bit for today. Types of sentences. Types of sentences. So, sentences, they're made up of phrases and clauses. A sentence doesn't just appear out of nowhere. There are building blocks to it. As I said, the words. But then words can get put into things, and then even bigger, then they make sentences. So a clause contains a subject and a verb, as it says there. An important difference between the clause and the phrase is that a clause can make sense on its own. You can add more to it after that, and then you get a more complicated sentence because it might have two clauses in it. But a clause should be able to make sense on its own. You should be able to do a full stop. You can do a comma, you can continue the sentence, but if you do a full stop after a clause, you've got a subject and a verb, so it should be able to make sense. The example there, for instance, Robert cycled quickly. That's a clause. It's very, very simple, and it makes sense, right? It doesn't feel like it stops early. You've got all the information you need. Now, what is important to define here is that when we talk about clauses that make sense on their own, because they don't rely on any other information. We call them independent clauses. They are independent, they work on their own, they don't need any other information, they are independent, right? So, the other end of a clause, because if you have an independent clause, what's the other side of it? Well, I'll tell you. A dependent clause. So if you're independent, you function just fine on your own. If you're dependent, you rely on something else, right? And you get dependent clauses that haven't got enough information on their own to make sense. And you need the independent clause before it to help the dependent clause make sense. We might say that a dependent clause we can also call a phrase, right? So, this is a singular word or multiple words that make up a noun phrase, commonly, right? They make a grammatical unit, right? So, when we talk about noun phrases, we've spoken about this before, this is when we have a noun, let's go back to our squirrel, an article, the, or a squirrel, let's say a. Let's do that. A very happy squirrel. A very happy squirrel. Let's use that as our example. A very happy squirrel. A very happy squirrel. I don't know if I muted myself there. I apologise if I did. A very happy squirrel. Very happy squirrel. This is a noun phrase. The noun is squirrel, and it has other words before it that make it a phrase, right? It doesn't say anything, though. We know the squirrel's happy, but what's it doing? Where's it going? On its own, it's not a complete sentence. A very happy squirrel. What? You can't start a story with that. Once upon a time, a very happy squirrel, full stop. You see how that sentence doesn't make sense? It needs another clause. It needs an independent clause to help add information to it. It is a noun phrase, specifically, that contains an adjective phrase. Okay? So, the whole thing, a very happy squirrel, a squirrel is your noun phrase, but you see how in the middle of it, just there, very happy. That's an adjective phrase. It's more than one word that describes a noun. Very happy squirrel. Adjective phrase. In fact, ignore the middle line. Your adjective phrase ends here because it's describing the squirrel. Very happy squirrel. A very happy squirrel is a noun phrase. Inside of the noun phrase is an adjective phrase, but on its own it doesn't make sense. It needs more information, and that information can come from an independent clause, which has a verb, which has an object. It might have an object, of course, doesn't necessarily need to have an object. So, we've said all of this. I think noun phrases, as you can see, there's no verb in this noun phrase, which is why it doesn't make any sense. We don't know what the squirrel is doing. If it was in the past tense, you say a very happy squirrel jumped. That makes a lot more sense, doesn't it? A very happy squirrel just sounds like an answer to a question. See, this is an isolated example where a phrase might make sense on its own, an answer to a question or a figure of speech. But if we're talking about grammar and we're trying to make a story and we're trying to have a conversation, this does not make sense because it hasn't got a verb in it. It won't make sense. So, let's look at these three kinds of sentences. Your simple sentence. Remember when we spoke about recipes earlier? That is your most simple recipe, your most simple ingredients. So, it's also a clause, but it works just fine on its own. A very happy squirrel jumped. The very happy squirrel jumped. The chicken crossed the road. You see, you've got here with chicken, well, chicken, subject, crossed, verb. That's all you need. Those are the two crucial parts of a simple sentence. Once you've got them, you've got a sentence. You've got an independent clause. It makes sense on its own. Then you get a compound sentence. Two clauses, both of them make sense alone, but you connect them via a comma or a semicolon or a colon or something else. Or indeed just a conjunction. It doesn't have to be punctuation. Remember when we spoke about conjunctions, it was something that connects something to something else. And what kind of conjunctions did we have? We had coordinating, your fanboys, your and, or your but, your very simple ones, right? The chicken crossed the road, and the fox chased after it. The chicken crossed the road makes sense on its own. The fox chased after it makes sense on its own, but you put a conjunction in between the two of them, and suddenly you've got one clause, the chicken crossed the road, two clause, the fox chased after it, connected by this one, a two-clause sentence connected by a conjunction. It's a compound sentence. The word compound often means a combination of something, and here we've got a combination of two clauses. Your last one here is a complex sentence. So this is an independent clause, which we spoke about up here. An independent clause, otherwise known as a main clause, which makes sense on its own, which is then followed by a dependent, or, as it says in the example, subordinate clause, which doesn't make sense on its own. The subordinate or dependent clause needs the independent clause to make sense, right? So, the phrase, ran across the road. What ran across the road? It doesn't make sense. Or indeed, if you were to say, the chicken ran across the road, that makes sense. The sentence, who was really silly, is not a sentence. It doesn't make sense. It's a phrase. It's a dependent clause. But when you put it in the middle of this independent clause, the chicken ran across the road, the chicken, who was really silly, ran across the road. Suddenly, this dependent clause, which on its own doesn't make sense within the context of the independent clause. It adds information to the independent clause, but it can only do that because it's within an independent clause, because it's helped by an independent clause. So, types of sentences. These questions are asking you to identify what kind of sentence each one of these is. Now look, it's also introducing ones we've spoken about before. Your exclamatories, your imperatives, your interrogatives. Remember, we spoke about the more formal words. These are what they are. They're coming back. Verses, your simple, your compound, your complex, the ones we've only just spoken about. Feel free to pause it here, have a go at these questions, and then when you have done that, you've got a few more of identifying what kind of sentence it is. So pause it here, have a go at these ones too, and then what we'll do, once you've done that, is follow me for the answers. Make sure you do them first, no cheating. You've got to do them before you come to the answers. Just got to wait for this all to load as usual. Where did we get to? We've done adverbs, we've done pronouns. Here we are. Prepositions and conjunctions. Indeed, there's all your answers. Okay. Feel free to pause it there, have a look at the answers for the sections that you've just done. I will see you again next time. Thank you very much.